So today we're taking a look at how to connect Calendly to Airtable, and we're going to be doing that through the lens of our podcast automation series that we've done recently. So without any further ado, let's get stuck in. Oh, by the way, hi, if you're new here, my name is Alex, and on this channel we talk about anything and everything low code, so grab a snack or something and let's get started. So in our typical manner, we're going to start off with a very quick demo. As you can see, I've got an Airtable database in front of me. I've got some episodes, I've got some people, and I also have some invitations, which is where we're going to be working primarily today. As you can see, I've got a motorsports sort of oriented podcast, and I want to invite Lewis Hamilton. All I have to do is just press invite guest. After a few seconds, the system will start working and we're going to generate a quick little invitation, a unique invitation, as you will see, where Lewis will be able to join the podcast. Immediately, you can see that we've got the starting up message and the link has been generated. We have the link over here just in case, but the system also emails the guest automatically. It can email them manually, but in this case, it's completely automatic. If Lewis Hamilton refreshes his email, he can see that he's got an invite. Dear Lewis Hamilton, you are invited to participate in our podcast, yada, 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 booking link. This whole thing works, of course, through Calendly. He just has to pick a time, anytime, and I've already pre-filled his name and email. That's all well and good. And schedule event. If I go back to my Airtable database, immediately I can see that the invite is set to active. The booking time that was booked is already here. There's the number of dates to the booking. It's all fantastic. Now, let's actually take a look at what happens if Lewis decides to cancel or reschedule. So let's take a look at rescheduling first and foremost, because that's a little bit more complicated. So Lewis would have received the invite to his calendar, of course. Now, I've also received a calendar invite for that event. You can see it here in my calendar. So now I'm back in Lewis Hamilton's email, and let's say I want to reschedule. So I'm going to open this up in incognito so that it is like as realistic as possible. Yes. And we're going to see what happens to that calendar invite. Let's say he needs to reschedule it for 5:30, right? He can't do 4:30, he can do 5:30. Reason for change, test, update event. And immediately, let's close this down, open up our Airtable, and you can see that everything has been changed. The days to the booking has changed slightly. It was 1.5, now it's 1.6. You can see the trail of actions that took place. It was active, then it became canceled. I wish it could say rescheduled, but that's how Calendly works. You'll see in a minute when we deep dive into this. So, and now it's set back to active. Great, right? Now, let's see what happens if he cancels, right? So I'm gonna jump in, see the updated invitation. We're gonna do the same thing. Open this up, incognito. We're just gonna cancel the event and let's see what happens. Test, cancel event, close this, jump back into Airtable. And now the meeting has been canceled. That's basically it. And if I open up my calendar, you will also see that the event has been canceled. I haven't refreshed the screen. It's just automagical. Now, if you do want to follow along, I'm going to show you now how to set up the database so that you can copy this workflow for your own podcast or whatever. All right, so the database, it's not really difficult. There's a few interesting bits to this, but generally speaking, to make this work, you don't need much. The only complicated bits about this database setup, I would say, is some of the formulas that I have used. For instance, let's talk about the main table, the invitations table, where I'm matching a guest. The guest must have an email associated with them. And as you can see, I'm just like looking up that email address. But yeah, the most complicated things about what you need to do kind of lie within the formulas where I'm just cleverly putting strings together, really. As you can see, this is one prime example where I have a complicated formula. It's not very complicated, but I have a formula that when I create an episode, I can see what the invited guest looks like on the other side. So I'm making sure that that license plate for that invitation record is kind of dynamic, and it tells me a bunch of things when I'm looking at that invitation from an episode perspective. And to do that, of course, I have to make sure that my leftmost field, my label field, is dynamic. So here's an example of that. Essentially what we have here is just a big concatenation where I'm saying guest, then I have an if. So if the status is blank, then just leave it blank. Alternatively, put the pipe space symbols and then the status that exists. And that's just the end of that if. Then I have a very similar, a slightly more complicated thing that deals with the confirmed booking date, so that if there is a confirmation, it prints the confirmed booking date. If there isn't, it just says unconfirmed. That sort of thing, that's the most difficult thing about the whole thing. All right, so we have the guest, we have the email, just a lookup, then we have the trigger for the automation, just a checkbox, nothing super special. Then we have a long text where we print the statuses of the booking, guest invite status, super straightforward. Then we have a drop down for the status itself. Again, super easy, canceled or active. We have the booking date and time. We have the days to the booking. Again, quite straightforward. Basically, if the booking exists, then use the date-time diff function to figure out how many hours we have until that booking and then just divide that by 24, essentially so that we can have the exact amount of days to that meeting. Then we have our custom invite link. This is one of the beauties of this whole system because you're sending a unique invitation link that's going to be different every single time you have a new person that you want to invite to the podcast to. It's going to be unique every time, so they can only use this once. Then I have a pre-filled custom link. Essentially, it takes that custom invite link and it adds a few extra things, mainly to help us with the pre-filling of the name, the email, and we're secretly passing the record ID into that invitation. The record ID is from Airtable, right? Here, over here, you see how I've got it in there? That is so that I can locate very easily, very quickly, this particular invite within Airtable so that I can update it as soon as I have data. So that's basically that. We also have an invite to the guest. This triggers an automation, and then we have a link to the episodes. Again, that is kind of self-explanatory because you want to make sure that you invite people to the episode and link those two records together. I think that's basically it. I mean, there are the basics. There is the table for episodes, which again, it's nothing special. It's just episodes. You can type in episode 5 or something like that. There is a link back to the invitation. There is just some lookups to the booking date from the invitation. That's basically it. I don't think you need much else. Of course, there is the people table where you can see the invitations that are related to said person. That's it. There's nothing else in terms of database. So having said that, let's jump in straight into automations. Okay, it's time to deep dive into automations then. Now, in this particular workflow, there are about 3 automations that are taking place, but they are simple. There's really not much to them. Let's begin at the beginning, and that is to actually trigger the invitation to the guest. Now, as you know, if you've watched the channel before, we like to trigger things the same way every time, and that is to have a trigger field, typically a checkbox, which we check and we trigger the sequence of events. Now, the way to set this up is that you have to, first and foremost, actually create a make scenario for this. And this is the scenario for the trigger. Super easy. I'll explain it, but you need to begin with creating a new scenario and then also fetching a webhook URL by creating a custom webhook module. So copy this URL, copy address to clipboard. So once you've copied your webhook URL, jump back into Airtable, create a new automation, just like I have done here. And typically we use the same method for triggering our automations, and that is to match certain conditions within the record. So our table is invitations. and the condition is invite guest is checked. If that is the condition, now the next thing that we need to do is, of course, trigger a script. If you've been watching the channel, you know by now that I use exactly the same script every single time. All you need to do is just change this URL over here with the URL that you've just copied, paste it in, and you're almost done. The next thing that you need to do is make sure that you have this record ID over here as an input variable, and don't forget to add the Airtable record ID value just by pressing this blue button and just mapping this Airtable record ID variable into this value field. Once you're done, press finish editing, turn this automation on, and jump back into data. That's it. You've done the triggering part. Now let's talk about the automation itself. So we've already kind of discussed that the first module in this automation is the webhook. The next module is updating Airtable. Essentially, we want to make sure that the user knows that we've started to do something. Now, as you can see, I've mapped my record ID variable into the record ID field. Of course, my table is invitations, and I'm just saying here starting up, and I'm just printing a little timestamp there in GMT. So that's that. There's nothing else to that particular step. The next step is to create a scheduling link within Calendly. Now, this is important. If you haven't used Calendly before, go ahead and create your account. You can even use a free account, I believe, for this, but ultimately, Calendly is a fantastic tool. I've been using it for close to a decade maybe now. And the beauty of it is that it connects directly to your calendar. You have complete control over how long people can book you for, which days, which times of the day, what kind of buffer you have between each meeting, and so much more. So in this case, I'm just using my 20-minute consultation link. The maximum event count is 1, so that means that you can only book this once. In other words, the link is unique. From there, we have update a record. Again, I'm updating that invitation with the custom link that I've just gotten. And as you can see, I'm basically posting a message of invite link generated. And then we have the guest invite status from module 7, because I don't want to overwrite anything. I just want to keep a tally of what has happened. Yeah, the next thing is to, of course, paste the booking URL in the custom invite link field that you've created in your database, and make sure that email guest is yes. And now at this point, let's jump in to the second part of this automation, which deals with emailing the guest and getting the confirmation back from them. So the second part of the automation workflow goes something like this. We need to create an email at this point to actually send to our guest. And that is actually quite easy to do. All you have to do is just create a new automation in Airtable. Of course, it can be done a lot better. You can use things like Brevo or MailChimp to have even more control over what happens to that email. But at the end of the day, yeah, even this is okay, at least for me. We just want to get an email delivered and we want to keep it simple. So when a record matches conditions, our typical trigger, the condition is email guest is checked, then we send an email. Super easy. This is just a looked up value from our guest that we are looking up into our invite, this particular field here. Basically, we're putting that into our to. Then we have from name Sonorus podcast, reply to invitation. We have invitation to Sonorus podcast. Dear guest, you are invited to participate in our podcast. Please book your spot using the link below, booking link. Many thanks. Excellent. You can play with this. You can make the email look and feel whatever you want, but just make sure that you use the pre-filled custom invite link, because that includes all the pre-filled fields, which basically helps with convenience for the guest. They don't have to put their name in, they don't have to put their email in, it's all pre-filled for them. But also, most importantly, we are also fetching that record ID, which helps with the automation that we're just about to take a look at. So as soon as the client receives their email, which looks something like this, and they press to book the meeting using the booking link, once the meeting is actually booked, we need a whole new scenario to listen to those events, listen to when somebody cancels or somebody books a new meeting. We need something to be there and manage that process. And this is basically it. It's very simple. All you need is to use a watch events module. All you have to do here is just press add. If you don't see a webhook here, just press add. From there, you can give this webhook a name. Make sure that it's using your Calendly connection. Use all the events, select all, choose an organization URI, and just press save at this point. That's it. You don't need to do anything else. It is now listening to pretty much every single event that happens within your Calendly account. Now, from there, what we have is a quick little filter. In my case, I'm just making sure that the UTM term exists. In other words, the record ID from my record exists. Now, you can use your own little filtration system, but for the purposes of this demo, I need to make sure that, yes, it listens to absolutely every single event that happens in my Calendly, but only the events that contain this UTM term actually pass through, because those are the invitees to my podcast. I don't want this particular system to listen to anything else. Having said that, we then get the event. And that is very straightforward. You probably don't need this particular module, but for the purposes of testing, I kind of have it there. So event, just map the event from number 3, which is basically the event variable that you find from module 3. Map that in, you should be golden. Then get a record. And in this case, you can see how I'm using that UTM term where I previously passed the record ID from Airtable. This is where it gets handy. I'm fetching that, then updating that same record using that same UTM term. And the reason why I fetched it is because of this guest invite status field. Like I said, I don't want to override anything. I want to fetch what it was in the past, which is this thing over here from module number 10. And then I have my space, my dashes, another space, and then I have my invite status, active or canceled. I'm using a little switch expression here, which basically says that, in the status of the event, if it says active, print this green emoji, active. If it says canceled, then print the X emoji and canceled. And then, of course, I have my little timestamp in GMT, simple stuff. Then I actually copy paste this switch expression down here in the status because I want to have a very unique anchor, so to speak, for the status of that particular invitation, because I needed to use it in that long concatenation that I showed you earlier. So yeah, that's the reason why this exists. The confirmed booking date is basically the start time. And yeah, that's basically it. There's nothing else to it. Finally, if this is a brand new invitation that is not linked to an episode, I'm using here a little filter, which basically says that, look, if there's no episodes in module number 2, in the response from module number 2, then create a new episode, and you see where this is going. I'm basically creating a new record, but I'm matching that invited guest, that invitation basically from module number 2 into this. I'm leaving the rest blank because there's so many things that you can and should do manually a little bit to retain control over a episode. That's basically it. There's nothing else to the automation. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. We are aiming to reach 3,000 subscribers by the end of this year. If you reached this far in the video, please help us with that goal by subscribing to the channel now. That's it. Let me know down in the comments below if you need me to do a deeper dive into Calendly, and I'll see what I can do. It's really a fantastic tool. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.